Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is MAX Stacy Report with Stacy Herbert, coming to you from an independent El Salvador, land of the free, home of the Bitcoin. This is an important word, independence. Stacy.
Yes, well, you know, Bitcoin guarantees your individual sovereignty, but also on the nation state level. It is what I call FU money. I think other people call it, but I'll claim credit for inventing it. But nevertheless, you know, I am thinking of the July 2022 calendar month, in that while we were recording, I saw this image of President Bukele and the quote of his that says, "Our independence is not for sale." And that struck me when we turn to this. I'm going to play a rather long clip here for two reasons. It's from Laura Richardson. She's the general in charge of Southern Command's Southcom. And so it's the U.S. military person in charge of all the southern part of the U.S. empire, the back door, the backyard, as David Ignatius calls it. And that's the other important thing about why I want to play this long clip is it's the Washington Post, David Ignatius. Listen to the questions and how he asks it and how he's so servile to empire and how he thinks it's just assumed that it's okay to talk about this entire region from Mexico down to Argentina as your backyard, and that you somehow have any sort of claim over determining how they choose to conduct their own domestic, international, or economic policy. So let's play a clip from this recent thing talking about their backyard, i.e. us here in El Salvador.
General Richardson, your command, Southcom, covering Latin America, is in some ways the most overlooked combatant command, I think, and that reflects a general problem for our country, which is that we just don't spend enough time thinking about our backyard. So I want to ask you to open our conversation by giving us a basic Southcom 101. What concerns you in your area of responsibility? What are the problems that are on your to-do list? And how would you define this part of the world and what matters there in terms of national security interests of the country?
I call our region that consists of the Caribbean, South America, and Central America. But we tend to look east and west a lot, and not so much south. And I call it South blindness. We just get wrapped up in east-west. And really, this is our neighborhood. And when you really think about what that means, in a neighborhood, what does it mean to you? And it means that you have friends and neighbors very close by. You have neighbors that you rely on. You have neighbors that you rely on for security, for safety of the neighborhood, right? You're in it together. And that's how I look at the Southcom area of responsibility and this very, very important region. This region is so rich in resources. It's off the charts rich. And they have a lot to be proud of. And our competitors and adversaries also know how rich in the resources that this region is. 60% of the world's lithium is in the region. You have heavy crude, you have light sweet crude, you have rare earth elements, you have the Amazon, which is called the lungs of the world. You have the 31% of the world's fresh water here in this region. And there are adversaries that are taking advantage of this region every single day, right in our neighborhood. And I just look at what happens in this region in terms of security, impacts our security, our national security, in the homeland and in the United States. We need to strengthen our neighborhood, and we need to realize how resource-rich this neighborhood is and how close our competitors and our adversaries are in the region.
As you see in that long clip, the general, Laura Richardson, she doesn't ever mention why it's bad that China is doing deals with their backyard. She just alludes to the fact that they're somehow not as good as America. She doesn't say they're stealing it. They're giving cash for it. She mentions actually later on in the interview that this is part of the Belt and Road, that there are 21 nations in Latin America, i.e. America's backyard, who are part of the Belt and Road initiative. So, and then there's 4 others who are receiving gifts, which I think she also would include El Salvador, because China's building like the library here and stuff like that. So somehow these are like nefarious and not good, and that therefore Southern Command or Southcom should get involved somehow.
Yeah. General Laura Richardson reminds me of Ted Bundy, who was a very personable guy, a good-looking guy, and he was a serial killer. Here you have a fairly, decent-looking woman. She's a general for Southern Com, and she's trying to invite El Salvador and other Latin American and Central American countries into the car with her, with a come on, saying, come on in, I just want to talk. And when the person gets in, she'll commit egregious murder, essentially. What about the CIA hit squad sent down to El Salvador in the 1980s? What about the coups in Central America and Latin America for decades? She keeps saying that we just want to be your friend. We're friendly. We're partners. Trust us. We've always been your friend. We've always been here for you. And those are such egregious lies. And she's a snake. And she speaks with forked tongue. And it's gross. It's absolutely gross. And to be here in El Salvador living with people that are friendly and lovely and God-fearing and Bitcoin-loving, and they're working hard. You think this schmata up there in Washington, D.C. with their big brass buttons and medals, and I'm going to go down there and be friends with them and steal all the lithium. It's gross. You should get a real job. You're disgusting. I'm ashamed. As an American, you made me vomit.
Well, so the point is she did bring up the lithium supplies, that the vast majority of the vast quantity is from the region that is the backyard for America. And what she's referring to, of course, is Bolivia. And I mean, the strange thing is, like, she doesn't go into it. She just mentions that it's there in the backyard and that the U.S. must secure it. But of course, a few years ago, this was a big conspiracy theory, as the likes of David Ignatius and the Washington Post would have called it, when there was a coup, many say orchestrated by Southcom, one might say, against Evo Morales, the elected leader of Bolivia, who had to flee, and he's only alive today because of Mexico, because Obrador sent the Air Force, the Mexican Air Force jet, to rescue him. But what was going on at the time, and by the way, Elon Musk even made a joke about it as one of the largest private companies consuming lithium for batteries for his electric vehicles, that the coup was about the lithium supplies there in Bolivia. The reason being that not to steal their supplies, but to prevent them from doing a deal with China, because apparently Evo Morales was going to do some sort of deal for the commodities in Bolivia, including lithium, with China. So apparently this was the conspiracy theory. But the fact that she's like pointing it out, that we must stop China from getting access, and you're like, well, we all remember that, right? So like, it's just weird that when you see the face of your neighbor who thinks you're their backyard and that you must, like, it's a neighbor from hell, as you said. Like, you get into the car with this psycho killer and you're like, wait, no, stop smiling like that, just like Ted Bundy did. Stop pretending to act vulnerable. Ted Bundy, when you bring him up, he was a handsome, charming guy, but he acted vulnerable, most importantly. That's how he got those women who he murdered as a serial killer into his car. He put a fake cast on his arm. And he's like, and he would go onto the university campus and he would say, oh, can you help me put my books in my car, my book bag? Oh, and these women would be like, oh, he's so handsome and charming and he's vulnerable. I'm going to get in the car. Well, she said the same thing. It's like she used that phrase of like, we're the last 20 yards. Like, we're so vulnerable because our neighbors, our backyard has so many resources. So we're vulnerable. Come help us.
Yeah, and next thing you know, it's rub the lotion on or it gets the hose again. You know, this is a horror film with the American generals. You know, the thing that struck me also was how she started it off by saying South America, Latin America, Central America, their natural resources are off the chart, right? So here's the come on. Here's the sales pitch. You know, here's, you know, the TV midnight advertising, General Laura
Richardson.
Richardson. It's like, come on, yeah, it's off the charts, all these natural resources. Wink, wink. So we're gonna, we're our friends in our backyard, we're just gonna set up a little, you know, military base. And we're gonna start stealing that stuff because we're friends. And Americans will be like, oh, 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 woo, 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 woo. Free stuff, free stuff. And it just goes on, decade after decade.
Well, it's more of a sign of also insecurity. It's over. We've already been talking about this. We've tracked it for the last few, 4 or 5 years, is deglobalization and de-dollarization. It started obviously with the Thucydides trap. It started really in earnest with the Belt and Road. I just mentioned the Belt and Road, and that started in 2013 when China, very cleverly figured out, basically their de Gaulle moment, right? Because Charles de Gaulle famously sent the French naval ship into the New York harbor to collect the $300 million worth of gold in 1969 and 1968. And that triggered what happened is the U.S. defaulted on their gold obligations and converted to an all-fiat world because the U.S. owed France $300 million. So here was China with a stockpile of trillions of dollars of U.S. debt from this trade relationship. And they realized, and they understood that they weren't going to actually receive the money for all the goods they sent. So what they did is they got some other sucker at the global geopolitical poker table, the trade table, to take their dollars instead. And that was the Belt and Road. So they're like, it's a game of hot potato trying to get rid of basically Ted Bundy's fake arm cast.
But what's phenomenal is that, and this hasn't dawned on the Pentagon yet, is of course Bitcoin is unconfiscatable. Mm-hmm. And El Salvador is rapidly putting reserves into Bitcoin, unconfiscatable Bitcoin. And they're doing so, and they'll continue to do so. So here you have this U.S. general, setting the stage for a hostile raid of Latin America. Another one, another massive hostile raid of some of the other countries' resources, so Americans can continue to be, getting free stuff. And they're going to show up, and they'll show up, and they'll be like, "Give us all your stuff," and they'll be like, "Well, it's all on Bitcoin, and it's unconfiscatable. So tough luck, imperial colonizing jerks. Get lost because we've got unconfiscatable Bitcoin."
But it's also deglobalization and de-dollarization, as I said. I mean, she referred to all of the oil in the region. And what she meant was Venezuela, which we have cut off from SWIFT, and being able to sell their oil. Same with Iran, same with Russia. So we're cutting off all the oil supplies which back our dollar, which therefore is destroying the dollar, and then you seize those reserves from Russia. It's just the serial killer is losing their mind. This is the point where Ted Bundy got caught, when he starts to all the bodies and the corpses and the fake arm casts are starting to pile up, and he's can't remember whose arm cast is that on the floor? Am I the killer?
Yeah, the Son of Sam serial killer comes to mind. Eventually all these serial killers, they get caught.
Yeah.
And because the trophies that they accumulate because they're egos. Remember, the American serial killing generals are egomaniacs first. And so they like to get their little trophies, but that always ends up working against them. And this could be that time when we have a complete failure by the Pentagon to take over in Central America and walk away with free stuff because of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin is the savior. And El Salvador is the savior, and you put two saviors together, and you end up pushing aside, no matter how many battleships show up, you get schmata, you get nothing. Hey, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to Max and Stacy Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Aleks Svetski. He is the co-author, along with Mark Moss, of a new book called The Uncommunist Manifesto. Aleks, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Max, good to see you again. I think we've been on all three of your shows now.
That's
Keiser Report,
so you hit the
Orange
lucky triptych. Congratulations.
There we go.
The trifecta, the
Thank
daily
you.
trifecta. You win. Okay. As
I'm
you
honored.
are not with your co-author, Mark Moss, we won't go into Uncommunist Manifesto too much, other than to ask you, can you give us a brief outline of the book and why people should buy it?
Well, first and foremost, I think the book does a couple things. Number one is we emulated the form and length of the original Communist Manifesto, which is basically brain cancer in a book. If you ever read that garble, you understand what I mean. But I think part of what made it successful, other than the allure of Marxism, which is basically, academic justification for being an entitled brat, other than that allure, the Communist Manifesto was short and easy to read. Like, it's 7,000 words. It's a 45-minute read. So we tried to do something that represented a case for a more hopeful, functional, free, and responsible version of human civilization. And we did it in 4 chapters. So it's nice and short. It's 85 pages. It's about a 10,000 word read. It starts off with some really novel definitions as well. And yeah, we hope to counter that stupidity. So I think we've captured the sort of the zeitgeist of the time, this because the whole world is sort of moving towards collectivism, communism. So we want to put forth a better message and a counter message to that. But we wanted to do it in a format where people can take 2, 3, 4 ideas that are really poignant from the book, but do it in an hour or 2 and then be able to pass it on to someone. So that's the short.
All right, so Stacy and I have moved to El Salvador, where President Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender September 7th of 2021. It's not even been a year. The mainstream media calls the Bitcoin project a failure. What are your impressions as a Bitcoiner in terms of what metrics even matter? Is it merchant adoption, or is it having a lot of that FU money that empowers the president to tell the IMF to stick their toxic debt up their ass? That's what it says right here.
I love you, Max. I think a couple things. Long term, the shift to a Bitcoin standard, I think personally, will be driven by merchants. And I say this for a specific reason. If I was to go and I should actually say merchants and workers, right? So it's the two people who are accepting payment. If I was to go and work at a cafe, for example, and I traded my time for a week to my employer, and at the end of the week, the employer offered to pay me in seashells, I would slap him and walk out. Like, I would demand money, right? And it would be the same thing as if I was to walk into a shop and I went to buy a good, like a TV from Best Buy, and I offered to pay them in sand, they'd laugh at me. So at the moment, the merchant or the worker, they demand a certain particular form of payment. And at the moment, obviously, the most demanded payment is the local fiat currency. Now, as more and more merchants and more people who are actually trading their time and energy for money in the world, as they begin to raise their standard and stop accepting toilet paper money for their time and effort for their work, and begin to demand real money, Bitcoin, we'll sort of see the world shift. When there's no other option to pay someone other than Bitcoin, and you want their good or service, you're gonna figure out a way to get the Bitcoin. So I think long term, that's what's going to happen. Now, I think this is where Salvador did the right thing, is that they, I guess, mandated the law, and they made it such that all merchants need to accept Bitcoin as an option. My hope is that over time, they'll move towards only accepting Bitcoin as they understand what this money represents. And then that'll sort of take care of itself long term. The other piece about having FU money, that's obviously fantastic. The more that rail is established as an alternative, the less susceptible a nation state such as Salvador is to the the overweight central bankers who want to eat everything, including people's wealth.
Yeah, the fiat model is consumptive in a lot of ways, and that's a huge problem. Now, President Bukele calls Bitcoin policy a policy of economic liberty. No other leader in the world claims this as their governance model. Do you think this is Enlightenment 2.0, like a better version of the U.S. Constitution as a national organizing structure? I mean, you can tie it into your book, the uncommunist manifesto, right? I mean, he's now made Bitcoin the model, and the entire country is following the ethos of Bitcoin, which entails a lot. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so let's answer it through the lens of the uncommunist manifesto. So in the original Communist Manifesto, Marx lays out what his 10 commandments of communism. He lays out 10 points that for a nation to become, or for a territory to become communist, truly communist in his words, it needs a whole series of things. And a couple of those you guys might recognize: a progressive taxation, a national central bank. Marx also suggests that all education should be run by the state. Marx also suggests that all the means of production should be managed and operated by the state. There is the means of communication and transport should be managed by. So all of these things. Now, what we've seen in Western civilization is that year by year or decade by decade, and there's been a few watershed moments, like obviously 1913 and then coming off the gold standard, etc., that basically ratcheted up and moved so-called Western civilization, particularly, the leader of the traditional Western sense was America. It moved it more and more towards a representation of what Marx suggested was the ideal communist state. I mean, America has a central bank. It has a progressive tax rate. There's public schooling, like all of these things. It ticks almost 7 or 8 of the 10 boxes of the Communist Manifesto. Now, in our book, we lay out basically 10 commandments of freedom, liberty, and responsibility for the competent individual living in a post sort of Bitcoin world, or a post functional world. And one of them in there, point number 4, is the abolition of any and all central banks which use fiat money and credit expansion to enrich themselves at the expense of the population who use it. So that there is like and maybe I should actually read number 5 as well. Our point number 5 is a movement onto a common, organic, emergent monetary standard, which cannot be managed, controlled, ruled, or issued by any group, organization, institution, or nation. So those two there, basically the existence of those is predicated upon the existence of something like Bitcoin. And the question then is, what steps does a society need to take to move towards this? And I mean, if anything, despite what the naysayers say, despite what the crazy so-called democracy advocates say, Bukele and Salvador are moving in that direction. So Salvador is actually ticking the boxes on our 10 commandments or our 10 suggestions for a free, just, responsible world, and unticking the commandments that Marx laid out in 1850.
Right. So, in other words, within the model of economic liberty, as you know and often write about in your new book, The Uncommunist Manifesto, and on your various blogs and the writings that you do for Bitcoin Magazine and elsewhere, it's all very great stuff. So the ideas that you're suggesting to a country like El Salvador, you're saying they're already ticking those boxes to move away from the Communist Manifesto. And what in particular, if you could name 1 or 2 things that they should, really emphasize now, or think about now, or continue to do that they're doing?
Yeah, I think as you said, these are all sort of gradations and steps. So, like, if I had to put it in the book's parlance, Salvador is now becoming more uncommunist, while the West is becoming more communist. Right? They're kind of trading places in a sense. So I would suggest other things, like our point number 8 is the abolition of public schooling and essentially state indoctrination camps. Like, and we see what's happening, like IBEX coming in, teaching people, teaching kids how to use Bitcoin, etc. If that market opens up, particularly the market for education, people will come, and you cannot compete. Like, public centralized schooling, number 1, it just becomes indoctrination camps, but it cannot compete with the private sector and private schooling. Like, people will go and teach, and with the existence of the internet and YouTube, etc., like, the price of education is just coming down. It's being digitized and demonetized. So I think opening up schooling and education is a huge step in the right direction. I don't know if there's a welfare state. Like, our point number 10 is the abolition of a welfare state. I don't even know if there's welfare in Salvador, so I don't even know if that's a thing worth pursuing. And of course, I mean, points, 1, 2, etc., around the idea of the absolute preservation of private property rights. So if that becomes like the central guiding principle of anything moving forward, that's what effectively people who are free and productive look for. They want to know that the realm or the territory within which they're going to operate, private property is first and foremost sanctimonious. Everything else sort of comes after that. So I think, yeah, the money is a huge step, education, and let's reinforce the other things that matter.
Right. So 1 year later from making Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador, not a single shitcoin, other than of course the U.S. dollar, is on the balance sheet of El Salvador. There has been an attempt by a few to kind of get in there, but they were rejected. Some folks actually tossed out of the country. Your thoughts on how the complete collapse of the latest round of DeFi, metaverse, and NFT scams are unwinding? Maybe I should put my asbestos sweatsuit on here. I have a feeling this is going to get gnarly. Go ahead, Aleks.
I'll try be nice. First of all, I just want to thank you and Stacy for all the work you guys are doing there. I know a big part of the rejection of the shitcoinery that is occurring in Salvador is by virtue of your presence there and all of the work that you guys are doing there. So first and foremost, a big thanks to both of you for that.
Yeah, it's hard for them to come in because since I am the bishop of Bitcoin and channeled Satoshi's spirit directly, I glow. And when the shitcoins arrive, they melt.
I love you, Max.
And then Stacy stares with the laser eyes, and they quiver and die in a heap on the floor. And some of them have actually been totally disintegrated. So we're using the Satoshi power. If you're a Bitcoiner, when you go to El Salvador, your natural Satoshi power is magnified by 1,000x. It's a superpower. You become a superhero. So I look forward to seeing you there, and join us in the superpower Ninja Turtles as we fight the shitcoiners in El Salvador. But nevertheless, these DeFi NFT scams, they are it was so easy to predict. Like Corey Clipston, was just laying it all out a year ago, 6 months ago, and like, this is what's going to happen. This is going to collapse. It's not hard. Why is this being allowed to happen? Why is the SEC and these other people, why do they just let everybody lose their money in these obvious scams?
Well, we need to pick apart the nuance there, right? Like, I still, being a free market kind of person, I think that first and foremost, the SEC shouldn't exist and shouldn't be protecting anyone, because everyone should be free to make or lose money as they wish. And then the market does itself a good job of calling out the scammers. And then the idiots who don't listen to the warnings should be completely wrecked. Now, where things get a little bit hairy is that we live in a world where the SEC does exist. And what they do, instead of doing their job, they're very selective about which scam to chase and like basically shut down, and which scam to allow to continue to run. So it's kind of like they want their cake and want to eat it too, in the sense. I mean, I hate that saying, but that's sort of the position here. So it's like these stupid Ponzi's will continue to exist. And I was on a show with Mark yesterday. I think it was with Tom Longo, who runs the Gold Goats and Guns or something, whatever his podcast is. And we were talking about meaning and communism, Keynesianism, shitcoinery, like all of these things. You look at them and they're all devoid of meaning. You ask a shitcoiner, like Consensus was over on at Austin, and I didn't go to the conference, but Mark mentioned that he was there, and he went to a couple of the so-called after parties. And you go to a Bitcoin sort of event or a conference, or you go to Bitcoin land in Salvador, like there's a meaning, there's a purpose behind what is happening. The big, grand, unifying vision and mission of installing a perfect money globally such that no one can get an unfair advantage in the game of life. Like, that is a profound meaning, or a profound vision, or a profound pursuit. You go to these shitcoin conferences, what's the meaning behind what you're doing? Oh, bro, I want to raise some money for a JPEG. Like, or I want to raise some money for a yam and like build a Rube Goldberg machine that basically flows the money around in circles and builds a Ponzi scheme. Like, these people are devoid of purpose in life. And I think by virtue of the fact that we've been living devoid of purpose for the last, 50, 100 years, we're kind of reaching a crescendo of purposelessness. Like, people are completely purposeless. They're running around gambling their minds out on whatever stupidity. And there's Bitcoiners, you, Corey, me, Francis, this, that, everyone's saying, don't do that. Don't step off the ledge. You're going to fall. You're going to die. And they're like, look, man, you shut up, stay back there. I'm going to step off the ledge and I'll deal with it later.
I'm all for free markets, but we have psychopaths in our society, and they would sell cyanide willfully and to kill a lot of people. And that's why when you go to the store, sometimes there's a skull and crossbone. It says, this is poison. Do not drink this. And that the government does that. The government helps keep the psychopaths from trying to sell a cyanide. Now, in the case of Ethereum, it is the equivalent of rat poison. It is cyanide. It is something that'll kill people, and consumers should be protected from this. It's not about free market. Ethereum is not a product that's competing with anything. It's just a poison that's trying to kill people, and there should be some awareness about this, and I think a lot of people would be served best as a result of it. Anyway, Aleks Svetski, the book is Uncommunist Manifesto. Thanks for being on Max and Stacy Report.
Thank you, Max and Stacy. Love you both.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of Max and Stacy Report, coming to you from El Salvador and the world. Until next time, bye, y'all.